know it's been a while, but welcome back to Chasers. I'm going to use that time bump to my advantage though, because this whole channel, I feel like, has been a series of evolutions at this point. So look at this episode, hopefully, and then the last episode of Chasers, and maybe you see just how far we've come. I don't know. But we are going to cover a lot of time regardless in this episode, not just because we're going to skip ahead to 2019 at the end. But before that, I think I should probably set the stage again. In 1993, we are still talking about Bob Budiansky as special projects editor over at Marvel. His assistant, Tom Brevoort, which there has been some news in that department since the last episode came out. Tom Brevoort has become the longest serving editor at Marvel now. So I guess he got his start even before that at Hasbro. He was writing the bios on the backs of Transformers boxes. So you can imagine how some of that skill set would have crossed over to some of these collectible comic book cards. But he had help. And believe it or not, he had help from a person named Dwayne McDuffie. And I am recording this on his birthday, February 20th. So happy birthday, Dwayne McDuffie. Support Black History Month as well while you're at it, because Dwayne McDuffie actually has a long list of contributions that we could be talking about. Just go look him up. I guarantee he's worked on something that you have loved at some point in your life. But beyond just what he did for the cards, in fact, not to go too much on a tangent here, but if he had his own collectible card, you might flip it over, and on the back there'd be a little blurb at the bottom, like there often is, that says, "Did you know?" And it would tell you that Keegan-Michael Key found out that he was Dwayne McDuffie's half-brother after he passed away in 2011. Unfortunately, Dwayne McDuffie has passed away, so check it out. I can also tell you that Dwayne McDuffie had the help of associate editors like Greg Wright and David Wohl, and colorer Paul Mounts. If you see his name keep popping up, literally, like if you look at the cards, his name keeps popping up, it's because he's colored, I think, just about every series we've talked about so far, with the exception of maybe the Marvel Masterpieces, since that was Joe Jusko, but he has had a hand in everything we've talked about so far and everything we will continue to talk about. So Paul Mounts up there, along with Arnie Sawyer, who was the designer they picked up in the first series. He, I believe, had done the Stan Lee card all on his own, and they just kept him on, and he did, you know, that look for Series 2, etc. So he's still on board for this one, for Series 4 that we're going to talk about today. And I even found out the name of the Strategic Business Unit Director for Entertainment at Impel Marketing, Ken Baroff. So he might have had a hand in some of those ideas that were coming down from Impel. You know, some of those ideas that they were cribbing from sports cards that Marvel was just kind of figuring out. You know, they did the win-loss percentage in the first series, which I don't know if we talked about, is completely made up. It's all made up, but those are especially made up. But I also read that the actual chase cards in the series was something that came down from Impel, from the sports side of things, since they already had that going there. So a lot of natural fits. Obviously, there were a lot of lessons to be learned in that arena. I mean, one of the reasons we're talking about these sets versus any of the other sets that came out before Marvel Universe Series 1 in 1990, because that was not the first. Marvel had been licensing out their stuff to also, like, I think Donruss, I think Topps might have got in there at some point too, but for the most part, they would put it on cheap cardboard and just take pictures or art from the comics, and those were the cards. So the reason we're talking about these is because there was a real partnership with Impel going on, where they brought in quality card stock, for one, and Marvel was bringing in their big name artists to do art specifically for the cards. So a lot of the stars were aligning in 1990, and that's a big reason why, I know I've talked about this before, they were a huge hit. In 91, they were an even bigger hit. That's why in 92, they started branching out. They did X-Men Series 1, they did Marvel Masterpieces in addition to Marvel Universe Series 3, and I know people look back on Series 3 as maybe where things started to take a turn. How much of that was that Series 1 and especially Series 2 were hard acts to follow, and how much of that was Marvel increasing production at any legitimate cost of quality? Who knows? That was also kind of the 90s, especially the early 90s in a nutshell. Business was still booming. How fast can we meet production? What are you talking about? A bubble. Either way, on that yearly schedule, I'm guessing they didn't have a whole lot of time for iteration, certainly not reaction to the market, maybe, especially since they were lacking, if you could say, some of the immediate feedback options that we have nowadays. But there are a few things, looking at Series 4, Marvel Universe Series 4, that I promise we're going to talk about. There's a few things that stand out as possible signs that they maybe had found some limits. First off, we're down to 179 base cards. There were 205 for Series 3. There's also more chase cards in both type. I think there's 3 different types, actually. But also, I think because of that, possibly, the frequency increased. So there might have been a little bit more of a chase going on there. But that was also the name of the game in the early 1990s. Just how many more shiny things can we make? In fact, do you sometimes wonder if maybe you witnessed or were somehow literally a part of the birth of what is now the adult ADD generation? So there's a few things to think about. And for the next one, I want to go straight to the cards, actually. Because you're going to see for every 9-card page, it's basically one contiguous scene, which I'm pretty sure they put similar characters or similar type corner of the Marvel Universe characters on the same page, but can't be sure because I still have no idea who Doc Samson or Moses Magnum are. But these sets have always been also kind of a snapshot of where the universe was at that time. So this would have been in '93 when, again, let's just say my interests were dipping a little bit. But I like the 9-card layout, I will say. In fact, I might like the layout better than Series 3, maybe, depending on the day. But I think where the dividing line probably is with that is that the art is lacking some of the names. I'm stuck on this page because it is Ron Lim. It is one of the names I know. But my ignorant self only recognizes Steve Lytle, Ron Lim, like I mentioned, and Ron Friends. So mostly Rons, for whatever reason. And honestly, no shade thrown at Stephen Butler, Brandon Peterson, Derek Robertson, Lee Weeks. When I can even find the signatures on the pages, some of them I can't even, like, it's not even surfaced well, so I'm not sure what that says. But honestly, at first I thought maybe the 9-card layout had something to do with that. I'm sure it's easier to have the same artist do the entire scene. It's probably a bit more consistent, although I'm sure they could have figured out a way, and probably would have been pretty interesting to see, you know, each artist do a different character on I mean, that's kind of what they did for Series 3 with Jusko, who I guess, and I didn't notice this, I guess the puzzle pieces do fit together in Series 3 a bit as well. The background, even though it's just kind of a nondescript spacey background painted by Jusko, I guess they do still fit together. I either didn't notice or forgot, but here it kind of reminded me of when I would be reading one of my books, you know, whether it was probably Wolverine or X-Force or even one of the X-Men, and they would have a guest penciler. And this is a very, I get it, very childish thing to do, you know, like this isn't what the characters look like, you know, it's almost gatekeepy in a way, but also, and tell me this isn't the eternal push-pull when it comes to comics, do you buy a book for its story or its art sometimes? When I was a kid, when you are young, let's say you focus on the art a little bit more. So this series, for that reason, I think left me a little bit wanting, even though, I mean, this layout especially, which does include characters that I would have been more apt to enjoy with some X-Force people in there. Also have no idea who Slayback is, though, for that matter. But then I remembered what happened in 1992 Image Comics. So I think Series 4 is unfortunately kind of a who's who of who's left at this point in '93. And you're going to see that also impacted the back of the cards, because this is where this first shows up. But I read that after not just the Marvel Universe sets, but of course, you know, X-Men sets and Masterpieces set, all the sets they were putting out, I guess they were having a hard time coming up with new and different or novel copy for the backs of the cards. So you're going to see here, there's hardly any at all. You've still got some of the mainstays, name, alias, quite often. The power set has been pared down to just 4 for whatever reason. Origin, first appearance, but the Did You Know fact is actually back. It was gone for Series 3. So I still love all that stuff because it leans into the encyclopedic nature of the cards, right? Like I said, this was where we went to get that information. And honestly, again, the art isn't bad. I'm in awe at the way they were able to pull off some of these, because I don't know if you've ever tried to do kind of a bust with a full-on character inset, but not easy to not get confused there. And some of these look fantastic still. Again, not to take away from anything that was done. Especially here, this might be my favorite spread in the whole set, actually, by Lytle, with Doctor Strange, Dormammu, Beta Ray Bill, Loki, Cobweb, Blackheart, Sleepwalker, Thor, Hellstorm. So maybe go look that one up if you got a second. But just design-wise, when it comes to the back, maybe still just not necessarily at the top of my list. But you will see the Skybox logo. Again, like Marvel Masterpieces, this came late enough in the year that Impel had changed its name to Skybox, which I guess they did in a bid at courting some of their sports people more. I mean, I don't know if they saw the writing on the wall, but I think they were keen to keep their sports base in hand, obviously. This is a fun Ron Lim spread here that you wouldn't necessarily expect with the Spider-Man stable, but it reminds me of the Infinity crossovers that were going on, where he was pretty much drawing all of the characters. In fact, we don't have the doppelganger here. That would have been cool. That would have been a dead giveaway, but still. And maybe the last thing I'll say about the contiguous layout here is, and I'm not sure, this is partly conjecture, obviously, I think we might have lost a little bit of detail in some of the cases. I don't remember the last episode I talked about this for, but the art for the cards was typically done at a quarter page and then was shrunk down to card size, with the exception, of course, Art Adams, who I believe called himself a goober in the process of sometimes going full page to get shrunk down. I think for some of the battle scenes, especially in Series 2, he said he was doing that. So what happens is that obviously it kind of compacts the action in a way, especially for Art Adams, so it might be 2 for 2 on that one, where they really just kind of explode off the card. Here, if I had to guess for some of the pages, I think it's, especially earlier on, I think we're probably closer to a 1-to-1, which would make more sense also if you're going to, cut the card up into 9 pieces. Otherwise, I can't imagine they were doing these at any huge sizes that they were then shrinking down. So just in the end, I feel like maybe we're losing a little bit of that compact action and detail, but I could be imagining that. This is another decent layout that I could not find the artist, could not find any signatures. It's funny, some of them sign on every single card. Others you got to look for the single signature on whatever card it might be. And then others like this one, just no record that I could find. Anybody cool enough to remember that Marvel had a Scarecrow character as well, with a legitimate, looks like a pitchfork there for shoveling hay, obviously. Here's the one for Ron Frenz, kind of gave him the Captain America stable, which makes sense. Ron Frenz, by the way, I think the only one so far that has had art in every single series, I believe. Whoever Proctor is he given a lot of tests? Another cool one here that might have taken the easy way out when it came. I'll admit, some of the contiguous layouts, some of the scenes they went with seem like they kind of maybe took a shortcut necessarily. This one is just a Ghost Rider head in the background that when you put it together, you can see what it is. I like the ones where there's a little bit more going on, that where a little bit more of a story is told maybe with the layout, but still good art, obviously. Oh, and Art Thibert, of course. How could I forget? In fact, I know he was a big inker. Did he take over one of the X-Men books after Jim Lee, maybe? Or Portasio left, who I don't know how regular he was on some of the books. This is, again, just 90s memories coming to the fore. So forgive me, but I do like this layout as well. I mean, and if you can imagine not knowing what was coming, right? You knew where it fit, I mean, because the number on the back, but also because where the border was. But again, you never knew, even if you knew it might be another X-Men, if we were talking about this spread, you never knew who, you never knew like how it was going to show up, what was going to be happening. So you might see a little bit of somebody's cape and be like, oh, who could be in the center or something like that. So, oh, and Tom Morgan too, obviously. He would have been one that's been around for every single series so far. In fact, he did the 20 test cards before Series 1 was even a thing, just as they were conceptualizing the idea with Impel. And those 20 test cards that Tom Morgan did ended up going just directly into Series 1. So, anybody remember Badoon? Do tell. I remember Death's Head, I think, from the other cards. Don't remember Death Metal. And gotta admit, Die Cut, pretty great name for a character. So, again, this was a new category for this particular series with the Unsolved Mysteries. I think they got all the high points in there, except maybe, depending on where the Marvel Universe was, I don't know if the Secret of Spider-Man's Parents was at the fore necessarily ever. I know maybe I've just been ruined by the Amazing Spider-Man movies, where I feel like that wasn't necessarily handled as I would have handled it, quite possibly. But Face of Doom, why not? Also sounds cool, but also the Face of Darkhawk, I feel like I would have differentiated a little bit there if it were up to me, but it wasn't, thankfully. But Famous Battles are back, obviously. I think we're even going to get to some team-ups here. Also, again, I'm not going to... This was even harder to figure out who drew these. I mean, look at that Executioner song, although maybe fitting for that series. I own it, and I believe I've tried to read it numerous times. I'll get through it. I'll let you know. But for the time being, it's going to take me maybe another year or so. And this, I have no idea where this stupid card is. I know I completed it. Evelyn and I blew up this checklist and filled it out as we went. It's checked off. It's number 169, which would have been Spider-Man versus Kingpin. So you know that's a great card too, but I apologize for this incomplete video. Yes, I've thought about going onto eBay to purchase it, but haven't got that desperate yet. Wait until you see the other seasons of this series. So more Famous Battles. Honestly seems like less categories overall than even Series 3. I know it was more cards like I mentioned, but still Series 4, a mixed bag, you could say. But honestly, the more I look at it, the more I like it. It's not bad by any stretch. And for the chase cards, actually, I did go pack to pack on this one. I'm sure I went maybe just a little overboard as well. I don't know that these needed the one-touch holders, but don't worry. I also still have a few things left in this Walkman case from the 90s because I actually pulled a double out of the group. So they did an entire 2099 subset, and I managed to pull Doom and Specialist, whoever Specialist is. So they're foil, you know, not the, when I say, oh, in fact, I was wrong about the 3 different kinds of chase cards. There's only 2. If I can make it work on camera. I'm trying to trust the autofocus on this one. There we go. I actually didn't know how rare this one actually was. I guess it only came in 1 out of every 180 packs, or even just 1 in every 5 boxes. This did come from an entire box. I'll talk about that in a bit, but apparently there are different tints. I guess this was something they started doing with their holograms. I think Series 5 has a bit of the same. This is obviously the green tint, but there was also red, and I guess blue is the rarest one you can get. So I'm not that lucky. Still pretty cool. But this is where the story jumps ahead to 2019. So even though you've seen that complete set now, that's actually a fairly recent development. What happened was way back in 2019, I could see my daughter was getting into comic books, and I promise, I don't blame you for not believing me, but I promise I've tried to not brainwash her. I mean, when it comes to Marvel and comics, obviously we've got the MCU now. In fact, in a lot of ways, the MCU is maybe the cards of today because it is so accessible It's not necessary, and the cards were in no way, well, actually, now that I've talked about them so much, the cards were wildly popular, but I don't know if they were as obviously wildly popular and mainstream as the MCU is nowadays, or maybe was a couple years ago, or certainly was in 2019. But I could see my daughter at that point was getting into comics, and she had some of the titles she liked. I did take her to shops, and she did pick out her own from there. It would often be Spider-Gwen or Miles Morales. I think she really liked Spider-Verse because she's smart, and stuff like that. Shazam was another one. So when I thought back to what I loved doing when I collected, obviously the cards were at the top of the list, and might still be, if you can believe. But back then they were close to everything I had, right? And you'll hear this over and over, at least I did in researching for all these episodes, over and over, just people talking about how that was like our internet back then. We could go to those cards, we could learn about all these characters that we have never owned comics for. To this day, I still know about characters and what they can do based on those cards rather than ever reading or owning a comic book of theirs. And the cards were where we went to learn that stuff. That's how we knew anything at all. That's how we found out what their first appearance was, their origin story, their power set. It was all just right there in our hot little hands. That and Wizard, which I have a box full of those too somewhere that we might talk about eventually. But I thought, especially with the MCU, as big as Marvel is nowadays, of course that type of thing is still going on. The hardest part will be just choosing which set to collect out of the millions that are going on right now, everywhere, all at once. And then I can buy some packs like I used to. Me and Evelyn can open them up and have a great time, maybe complete a set, who knows? Not even close, not even just a shadow of what I was used to, what I knew from when I was a kid. And that's a bit of an asterisk that we'll add to the next episode, but let's just say I essentially found out that the cheapest, best way to do the thing I did in the 90s was to go buy the cards from the 90s. And if you hear me talk down about the 90s, number one, I grew up in the 90s, so it is my right and purview, but one of the things I will say, for all of the market flooding they were doing, I'm benefiting from it now, because I can find new unopened boxes of Marvel Universe Series 4 on eBay in 2019 for $50. So that's what I did. Got a box off eBay. Evelyn and I opened them up pack by pack, completed that set, except for that one stupid card. Then the market exploded. It was the weirdest thing. So, and I'm not going to say, obviously I didn't start it, but there are people of my age that appears like had the same thought that, man, you know what? I really liked collecting those cards back in the day. And it might have been some of the speculators, or at least the speculator inside of us that always existed back then, that pretty much has driven up the price to over $200 a box. Even for Series 4, Series 5, you're going to be lucky to get out the door for under $200. I've heard some of the Series 1, Series 2 stuff goes for upwards of $1,000, or did at some point. So I was a little bit early, and we'll talk more about this next episode as well. But in 1993, basically the opposite was happening. It really was the beginning of the end in a lot of different ways. For one, there was a changing of the guard going on when it came to who was producing the cards. But also, and probably most importantly, that bubble, that comics bubble I keep talking about or alluding to, was finally bursting. And I think there's a reason they say bursting instead of slowly deflate over time. Because if you go and look it up, and it's fascinating, I really could do an entire episode on just that. Maybe I'll do some behind the scenes Patreon stuff that I cut from this episode. But to not go into too much detail, basically there was a speculator boom, which means there were people coming in from outside kind of normal collectorship, you know, that didn't really understand maybe what comics themselves were all about. So they were buying up and kind of feeding what the publishers were doing, which they were really happy to string those people along, really, but also otherwise just flood the market. You know, we gobbled it up too. I wouldn't consider myself a speculator by any stretch of the imagination, even though I feel like if you were collecting at that time, there was always that piece of your brain that was like, well, these are going to be worth millions one day. So we all participated. I've got a box full of shiny number ones around here somewhere that I will probably also talk about at some point. But It wasn't just the quantity either. They were pulling out all the stops when it came to content like covers and crossovers and killing off characters. This is famously when Superman and kind of Batman died, but also didn't really. So all of that and on. But probably the single most devastating event to the market within a highly localized area of Lompoc, California, was that I just started moving on to other things. This is why Series 4 went uncompleted and forgotten, actually, because after Evelyn and I completed that set I just showed you, I was going through some boxes and found another incomplete but fairly extensive set of Marvel Universe Series 4 that I had collected, I'm sure pack by pack, didn't even put in a binder, and then completely forgot about. So that's kind of where I was at towards the end of 1993, but the story does not end there, obviously, because here we are. But also, next episode, we will talk about what can be called Marvel Universe Series 5. And I dare say it won't be 2 years before that episode comes out, but maybe no promises, except that it will be worth the wait. So if this was interesting at all, check out Patreon. Again, I might do some behind the scenes or specific stuff there that I cut, or at this point, I say these because I'm back at it. These Chasers episodes are the episodes I do the most research for and probably have the best time researching for. That would be a toss-up. Again, the Kung Fu movies are pretty good too, which quite possibly could be the next video you'll see for the channel. So come back for any one of those and check out patreon.com/Ryan_runs_ if you want to see these more often. Until then, thanks for hanging out.